education budget, we spend about 98% of the dollars that are available. So right now the amount that's in the co-chair's budget, as the legislature debates this, is like $7.235 billion, I think. 98% of that will go to schools. About 2% of it remains at the Department of Education for our operations component of the work that we do. And of that money, of that 2%, some of that will go for the assessment. What we try to do in Oregon very much is have local control. That's why the $98 million goes out in a formula, and then local districts decide how to spend it. And so if whatever your local district is, and sort of put this back on local districts, and as the next superintendent I know how this works, we get about 98%. We work with our community to set a budget. We have a budget committee and a school board. We run it through the process, and we put a budget out there, and then we offer services to kids. And so districts get about 98% of that money to make those kinds of decisions, and including, are they going to offer grad training? Are they going to hire people who are going to work on all kinds of different components of offering education to kids in the state? So I don't know that we really address the component about developmentally appropriate. Developmentally appropriate is a really hard discussion. It's something I really have struggled with. I also really struggle with the idea of instruction that's not joyful, right? So I get, once in a while we talk about, we're going to full day kindergarten in the state, right? Instead of half day kindergarten. And once in a while people want to talk to me about, well, what's that kindergarten instruction going to look like? And I would hope that it's going to be really joyful instruction. That when kids come in, that there's going to be lots of singing and play and exciting stories to read about in order to learn about literature, as opposed to some kind of drill and kill that's going to be like terrible and make students not be excited about learning. And I chafe at the idea that because we're going to set high standards, that we can't teach to those standards in a joyful way. One of the things I like about what we have going on here is this is a set of standards that we're asking students to achieve and teachers to teach to. How that instruction takes place, the curriculum that gets used, the methodology of instruction in the classroom on a daily basis, and whether or not it's joyful or drill and kill, that's up to the instructor. I hope that as a Department of Education, we're out trying to work really hard to help teachers be as effective at instruction as possible. And I know that educators take that to heart. I come from a family of educators. My sister talks to me almost every Friday and tells me what it was like to teach in her second grade classroom for the week, right? And it sort of gives me a nice perspective. My son's a high school science teacher. And so I get that perspective on a regular basis, and I hope that the learning that they're doing is joyful. So when it comes to developmentally appropriate, it is really important that instruction is developmentally appropriate. And as well as the kind of the joyful part that I just talked about. And how we go about instructing sometimes things that are fairly challenging concepts can be as much about what's developmentally appropriate as not. I mean, how I go about teaching something is about developmental appropriateness as well. I was amused recently by a friend of mine who's a superintendent in the state now, who was talking about one of his previous jobs, and he was a high school typing teacher. I don't know how many people, I took typing in high school. I hate to sort of have you raise your hand, because if you do, you know, it's from a time that's gone by, right? We don't do it. And he said, I was a high school typing teacher, and we taught typing in 10th grade, and only in 10th grade or 11th grade. And I said, why? And he said, well, because we believed that typing wasn't developmentally appropriate until 10th grade, and that the brain really couldn't make the connections to cause that to happen, to make your hands move when you looked at paper and had the words come out, because it was only developmentally appropriate once you were a 10th grader. He said, I was at one of my schools today, and I watched the 5th graders typing, and some of them were at 65 words a minute. And I sort of thought, wow, I never thought I would see the day when we sort of blew through this thing about what's developmentally appropriate, what are kids really capable of. So I'm not saying that there isn't developmental appropriateness, there absolutely is. And we need to make sure that we're hitting the mark correctly. One of the pieces of work that we plan to do between now and next December, because we're really working hard at connecting the early learning world to the K-12 world, so there's a nice connection there in the learning progression, is to look at the standards that exist in early childhood and the standards that exist in K-12 and make sure that we have a nice handoff from one to the other. And that means that we really need to look at developmentally appropriate standards, including some of the self-regulation skills that are really important for kids when they come to school, and how we go about teaching those components too in a developmentally appropriate way. So there's lots of stuff to that.
That doesn't mean that every child will, and that doesn't mean there's not a range. So I don't think it respects the range of development. Children don't develop like this. They develop like this, and they eventually might end up here. Some of them might not end up there, because people are different. And so when you're setting these standards and rating students and rating schools based on whether they meet these standards that are completely arbitrary or not. I mean, just like your 10th grade typing. Well, that was an arbitrary standard. Now, I mean, okay, so but with what you're saying then, I could have a 3-year-old doing that. There is some actual true milestone that children are and are not developmentally capable of. Yeah. So you can keep setting the standards higher if you want for everything, but at some point, it's going to break children.
Sure. So